shall I start then?
Shoot.
Yeah, so Ant suggested that we put this in just as a topic, like a long time ago, without having defined at all what it was. I think because we both sort of felt that, we obviously work in open source all the time, but I don't know if we talk about what it is or like what it means to us or anything, or like how it's important. So we both kind of care about that, I think. So we thought we'd try and talk about it a bit. But of course, when we started working out what we're going to talk about, we discovered that it's nebulous, right? It goes everywhere. So this is our attempt that finished just like 5 minutes ago to try and put some structure on the topic. Yeah, there's a lot there. Next slide, please. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so the first thing is to define it, I guess. So there are basically two main terms here: open source and free software. That are kind of in conflict and kind of not. Like open source and free software both mean software that's distributed under a set of licenses that allows people to read the code, download and modify the code, and redistribute the code. Some licenses allow you to just redistribute the code commercially, and others allow you or change the license on what you distribute, and then some don't. But broadly, like open source and free software mean the same set of software, but the difference between open source and free software is that open source purely means the practicality of having a code base that has open source code in this way, whereas free software comes with a whole load of values that are all about empowering people. And so the point of free software is that you start from empowering the user and making sure that they have control, and you're not taking control away from them. Open source doesn't care about any of that. Open source is so some people would say that open source is the corporate version. This quote here is from Richard Stallman, who's since the start was kind of the leader of the free software movement, but he's fallen out of favor a bit recently. I'll talk about that a bit more at the end. And then you might hear FLOSS a lot. FLOSS is free, Libre, and open source software. Libre is in there because the word free is ambiguous in English. People often mean that free software means software you don't have to pay for. It doesn't mean that at all. It means software that provides freedom. And so Libre is there to mean that it is a more clear. So,
sorry, Robin, I felt like you were reading my message and didn't want to interrupt. I just think that the statement of free software is a little bit outdated nowadays, right? Because with open source becoming quite a big thing, a lot of people feel different about open source. Some it's more of a practicality, some have more emotion put into it, more values put into it. I don't think this is kind of a very binary thing. Yeah,
it doesn't have to be binary. So like the FLOSS movement, the free Libre open source software is incorporates both. So it's saying that you have free, that includes the free software and it includes open source software. And for people like Stallman, that's well, you can't really compromise, because when you compromise, you capitulate on your values inevitably. In his opinion, but he's kind of an extremist. He's at one extreme end of the spectrum. So let's carry on. Yeah. So I mean, now, so there was this fight, back in the start. There was a fight between proprietary software and open source software. I don't think there is anymore, right? Open source software is literally everywhere. Like you can't talk about there being a fight anymore. Linux powers almost every server in the world. Git is used by everybody. The web is sort of inherently open source in the sense that you can read HTML, CSS, JavaScript everywhere. Everyone's using Apache Nginx, Docker, Kubernetes. Android is on everyone's phones. I say a sort of open source because it's obviously, yeah, it's very much under Google's control, but it's you know, in large parts of it are successfully open source. Firefox and Chrome, almost every programming language is open source. OSX's kernel is open source. .NET is open source. And then OpenSSL and like all of these libraries that do all of these super important things like inside of the applications that you're running are basically, you know, so many of those are open source as well. Like you can't, the world cannot exist without open source software. So there's no longer a fight to speak of. Go on, Ed. Thanks. So yeah, so one of the arguments for open source and why it's one, basically, is that it comes with all these benefits. So like it's kind of inherently obvious that nowadays it kind of seems obvious that by sharing this source code, by developing it collaboratively with everybody watching, you know, where lots and lots of people can contribute, lots of people can see, it just ends up better quality overall. And that's why like everything that's used, all of these core functionalities that are used by businesses across the world, all these servers and everything are all open source. The Cathedral and the Bazaar was like a really seminal essay. I don't have to hand right here when it was written or by who, but yeah, I mean, look it up. It's got these 19 lessons for what makes free software good. And they're actually really, really worth reading. So it says like the best software starts from a developer scratching their own itch, or I don't know, this might also be slightly outdated because it very much centralizes the developer, but in general, if you're solving a problem that you know to exist and you care about how the problem is solved, then you know you're solving something that needs solving, right? Rather than like some idea of trying to solve something for some imagined audience. And then if you release your code, put it out there, let people find it, then you know you're going to get feedback quickly. That feedback is really invaluable. You can tell what's going wrong. You can do everything. This throw one away idea, like they say that you're always going to end up throwing away your first version of anything. So there's a load of really good lessons in there, and they're all like, I mean, some of them are less related to the fact of the code being open source, and some of them are more. But overall, it basically points to the fact that open source collaborative working leads to like way better quality software. Yeah, so like that's like one side of the open source, like the reason to be open source. So the other side for me is the philosophy, which is the more like what comes from the more free software tradition, I feel, which is the empowerment and transparency, the fact that the code is out there, anyone can find it, anyone can download it, there's no cost to it on the whole. You know, you can take it and you can start to hack around. Anybody can access the software, they can find it, they can change it. It empowers everybody, and it's better for humanity overall. So like Cory Doctorow, who I really like, makes this point that he says sharing your work product for other people's review and improvement is the soul of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment was, you know, this period in the 1700s when everything came together. There was an explosion of science and culture and art, and a lot of people see that as like the foundation of the modern age of people of really human ingenuity, like taking off. And for Cory Doctorow, that's like when we really learn to like build on each other's ideas and share things, like share ideas, and that through that sharing, it allowed people to really like stand on the shoulders of giants. And that's why mainly in science, but in all other ways as well, like being able to see what other people have done before you and have that shared and build upon it. And that really like meant that we went places we could never have gone otherwise. And that's what open source does, is it says, rather than me just trying to build my own little thing over here and not tell anyone about it, and then you have to go and build your own version of that same thing, we share everything that we can. Why wouldn't we do that? If you want humanity to succeed, that's what we would do. So I mean, for me, there's a lot of principle right there at the foundation of open source. Interestingly, the Wikipedia article on free and open source software gets quite political down there, and I'm going to read this out because I find this quite fun. So you've got by defining ownership regulations in the construction and use of information, a key area of contemporary growth, the free and open source software counters neoliberalism and privatization in general. By realizing the historical potential of an economy of abundance for the digital world, FOSS may lay down a plan for political resistance or show a way towards a potential transformation of capitalism. That's obviously getting a bit far, but there is also this kind of tension with the forces of capitalism, with this idea of like sharing everything. Anyway, next slide, please. Yeah, so open source has sort of gone through these phases. When it first started, it was like all the tech giants had proprietary software, and they were trying to like control it and license it. And open source was like a revolution against it. And then people started to try and make business models out of it, and that was quite tough. And Red Hat were really the first success at that, where they monetized support by creating a license that allowed the source code to be open, but they could, but they would still sell the license to businesses, so they would provide support. And then you had these open core business models. There's a lot of them where the software is like the core of the software is free and open source, but then they add like a lot of proprietary features on top of it that are not really free and open source. And that's kind of what Google did with Chrome and Android, but there's lots of other smaller examples of that. And then now what you have is really like software as a service, where the centralized company owns the servers and owns the services, but everything that they're built on is open source software, and they contribute to the open source software. But there's an argument that this is what they're sort of doing is exploiting the open source community to take the code and then package it in a way that keeps all the control with them. So that's where I think, Elio, there's a fair amount of conflict between, like particularly in today's world, between open source, the idea of just like the source code is available, and the actual community-based philosophy at the heart of free software. Next. Thanks. There's a lot of related movements around this, all of which I care about. Hacker culture is the ability for people to just like take stuff and hack around and not be judged for it, and not put laws that restrict them from doing it. Like that's the whole DRM fight. People should be able to like download videos and try and splice them together and whatever, like for creativity. Then there's open government, which is the idea that government, because they define all the structures that govern our whole lives, they should be completely open about everything they're doing, and open source can really help with that as well. But beyond open source, that all the processes should be open. Corporate transparency. Corporations are massive seats of power. They make, their decisions can exploit people, can lead to huge pollution or whatever. And so similarly, corporations should be transparent and clear about what they're doing, so that the whole of humanity can be involved in deciding what's a good use of corporate power and what isn't. Working in the open is kind of like corporate transparency. It's very simple. That's like more from inside, the idea of that we share what we're doing. Open data is the idea that data should be available for people to use and do like citizen science with, so it's available to everybody to see like how life expectancy is changing here and there or whatever. Open access is kind of similar, making sure that everybody can, like, rather than keeping things locked down, keeping things behind closed doors, we try and make sure that people can access the information they need. Open collaboration, and then just openness in general. Like there's Wikipedia articles on all of these. Openness is just it's like the I was kind of going up the hierarchy to the top. So openness just encompasses everything, like why it's good to be generally open. and sharing everything. Yeah, so there should be, like, because open source is supposed to empower people, like anybody can access all this software, right? It should be freely available. Anybody can run Apache, anybody can run Kubernetes, anybody can use Git, anybody can use Git, you know, open GitHub accounts for free and all that. It should be very empowering. It's very hard to quantify how empowering it is because it's already everywhere. Like, it's not like we have a control group to be able to say, well, this is an example of a third world country that doesn't have open source software, right? But there's strong reason to believe that this open source software should be a significant push against the sort of corporate and state power that exists in the massively rich sort of parts of the world. So poorer parts of the world should really should be benefiting from, and are benefiting from, this ability to be able to take this stuff that's just out there and available and plug it together themselves and come up with ways of, you know, running their own societies and all that. I do believe that it is a massive force for good in that way, even though, as I say, it's like, I had a look, it's quite hard to find clear graphs or data that really illustrates that. But I think that's because it's just so in the fabric of everything, you know. Yeah, open source has a lot of problems that there's a lot of discussion about. It's always going on. Funding. This came up recently with the log4j thing, right? Where that was a really central library that there was a bug in, that a security issue or something. I can't remember exactly. And then no one fixed it for a long time, and and that's because they weren't being paid to do it. And so what do you do about the fact that you have all these like small volunteer contributed open source projects that everyone is relying on? I mean, it's beautiful in a way that people have created, hobbyists have created these little things that then become such a fabric of like all of tech in the world. That's really, really beautiful, but then it's a massive point of failure. Because we don't pay people for it. And then the question is, should we pay people for it? Like, if you pay them, are you then taking away the independence of those central pieces? Do they no longer belong to the community? Do they start to belong to the companies that pay them instead? And is that problematic? So, I mean, yeah, there's a whole debate there. Accessibility, like open source. I mean, I'm sure you probably all feel this. Open source is supposed to be this beautiful thing that we can all contribute to, but contributing to it is not easy. Like, I don't know how invited you feel into the community, but it can feel pretty exclusive. If you ever try and like actually respond to a bug or submit a pull request to an open source project, like, chances are you're going to get told that you're stupid at some point. There's a lot of problems there. Diversity, like, I'm pretty sure open source is, I mean, the sort of open source community, as in like contributing to open source projects on GitHub, is much more of a sausage fest even than tech in companies. So like, it's yeah, there's massive diversity problems. Corporate takeover I talked about a fair bit, and then Stallman, who was this like father of the free software movement, but now he's kind of a misogynist, and then there's this whole controversy. Like, people don't like him very much. Like, he's quite a he said a lot of controversial things, and there's good reason for him being a problematic figure. But then the Free Software Foundation voted to put him back on the board, and so now that Free Software Foundation was the leader of the free software movement, is now like really tainted with this like old world thing, and so I don't know where we are with all that. So there's this like that's kind of a problem with the philosophy of free software as well. Yeah, so that's kind of the end of, I think that's the end of my section. I'm gonna hand over to Ant now to talk about more practical things.
Yeah, well, Robin kind of covered all of the fundamentals and the principles and explained a lot of the definitions. But one thing one thing I think that kind of struck me when I did a bit of reading around this was, I mean, obviously I've been quite involved in this for quite a while and know a lot of it, but something that I didn't know about and I hadn't thought about is how open source is, they say, true innovation. And the reason they say that is because there's no incentive to sort of control users, entrap them to. And okay, just imagine you create a piece of software that interacts with Slack, interacts with Mattermost, interacts with something else. A company might come along who owned it as proprietary and not and take away the Mattermost Mattermost connection because it will financially benefit them to do a deal with Slack, for example. Whereas in an open source project, there is never almost never a incentive to reduce the compatibility and the interoperability of software. And that really reduces the monopoly position of any software. So generally, free and open source software is better for everyone in that sense that you're going to get a good competition and it's never going to revert itself. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some benefits to us because it's very hard to sort of from a high level understanding of these philosophies understand what it brings to us as individuals. So us, when I say us, I mean literally us working in the web team in Canonical, in the wider open source community, working on web, for example. When we work in the open, it allows us to attract talented, like-minded people. So every PR we do, every issue we work on, it should be open and readable to everyone, so that people can see how we work, what we work on, what our tech looks like. They can be involved in conversations around design, even before becoming, an employee. There's a world of access into our working practices and our the way we work and the way we communicate, which would hopefully attract people who are, that way inclined and are also, smart people are looking for access to see what companies look like from the inside. And hopefully we open that up to allow access. And every time we lock that down, we reduce the chance of someone brilliant who we all want to work with not applying because they don't see it. One other thing which is kind of rare in this industry is that we can personally promote ourselves on topics of interest. So, for example, the accessibility work that we've been doing, we can talk about it. We can talk about the workshops we did, but we can also, as part of that, talking about the workshops, we can point to practical PRs and practical discussions and show evidence that we're not just talking about it from the standpoint of the wanting to contribute to it or caring about it, but we actually practically are doing it. That really will help us and can benefit us to become well known in the industry for this. I mean, you can't really become very well known in the industry unless you just keep publishing things without practical examples of things. So it helps us in that point. And benefits to all. So thinking mainly around web, it saves us all time and money because we can reuse packages, we can reuse other things. We don't have to keep reinventing the wheel every time we do stuff. So time is money, so both of those are saved. It also provides cheap, almost free access to the industry. So to take most industries, you have some upfront cost. If you want to sell things, build things, you need to buy the equipment to build that. For web, you just need a computer, which is the cheap part of this. But yeah, the fact that the web and its tooling and IDEs and to some extent design software, if you want it to be really cheap, is all free. Basically allows everyone, doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, and or any aspect of that. If you're interested in web, you can get involved, and that's probably why the web is winning the fight over software in general. And also, if you want to learn, this kind of the same ilk, but if you want to learn, then the web is free. You can view source. I mean, the first time someone views source on any website, I think is one of those unique eureka moments where it always surprises me when people don't know you could do that. You forget how much you know, but when you show someone you could just go to Google and view source, they can't, most of the time, they can't believe that you can just view Google's software that's sitting behind the websites that they build, or any website, of course. But that's one of the beauties and beautiful things about the web is I'm teaching my brother at the minute, actually, web development, and he'll often come to me with a problem and say, how do I line these three things up next to each other? Well, let's just say go on the web, find something that does, find something similar on the web and just view source, inspect it. And it gives everyone the ability to sort of see how other people do things, which is kind of beautiful. And then just some sort of practical examples of places where this is done quite well. There are many, of course, but I picked a couple out that were just kind of interesting. One place, one company that I think has done a beautiful job of this is GitLab, mainly around publishing their company handbook with all of their values and all of the information that they hold for things like transparency and openness. It's really worth a read. They say some really nice things about sort of your thought process on. So basically, they say right at the beginning, at some point you're going to think, should I share this or should this be public? And they suggest that your thought process should be make it public as a default. So just that statement from the company is a pretty powerful statement, that your de facto piece of information should always be public. Kind of sets the groundwork for everything else that document ends up talking about. But also the fact that they publish their handbook has a bunch of benefits. This is their corporate handbook, so it allows people to. Oh, do they? Okay. Well, I was about to talk about that as well with Buffer. Yeah. So by publishing your corporate handbook, you allow people who don't work for GitLab to get an understanding of how GitLab works. It means that if you're an employee, you can just Google for pieces of information instead of having to search an internal wiki, which is never very nice. You can point to things, like if you're having a discussion with someone that isn't part of the company or is part of the company, you can just point directly to a piece of information and say, this is how we work. There are tons of benefits to just publishing this information. And I guess my main point is that this information seems, on the face of it, the knee-jerk reaction to this kind of information is, this is company confidential. Like this is information only, no one else cares about this information. It's only employees that care about this information, so let's keep it private, keep it internal. But for the benefits I just said, that's not true. And I'd be interested to know if anyone had any ideas of information in our company handbook that you would deem would have to stay private. And then, straw man it. What if that did go public? What would be the cause? What would be the outcome of that? Just keep questioning it until, and to be clear, there is some information that should be kept private. Obviously, passwords and credentials are the clear, obvious ones. But all other information is pretty much always beneficial to be open, from my point of view. Buffer here also, it does a nice job of publishing their salaries. They actually set their salaries not based on, they have an algorithm that sets their salaries. So it basically completely breaks down the diversity and inclusion issues that could arise around the company. It's all algorithmic, and their benefits and their bonuses are all algorithmic as well. And they publish their algorithm as well, which is really nice. Worth just looking at. Also, one thing they do quite nicely is if you go to their salary page, which is linked by the slides, which we'll share after, they also have jobs right underneath. So you can see you filter by department. So say you want design, you see all the designers and exactly what they're all on, what their job titles are, and service, and under that it says, do you want to apply for here's our open roles? And I think that sort of helps to sort of frame what you're kind of expecting to be applying for. And that's it. I think we will hand over for questions, I think. Anyone has any?
I have so many questions, but I'm the guy who talks so much. I don't know if someone else has a question. No? Okay, really? Okay. Firstly, like, I joined Canonical because I've been in a hackerspace since 2013, and we had a lot of Ubuntu DVDs back then. We always ordered Ubuntu DVDs, and we would be doing Ubuntu jams and hack parties and give out CDs when there were still a thing and people had hard drives in their laptops still, and it was so fun. And that's why I always wanted to join, not because I don't know, it's a cool tech company. So I'm glad that we finally are talking a little bit about this, since I kind of pushed this into a little bit of an alley in my brain. I wish we would do more kind of stuff like that, especially on the desktop or vanilla side. I think it's getting improved, but yeah, I still think we have that feeling that we need to make things perfect and publish it before showing it to the public. And I think we can get over that a little bit as well. Marina?
Oh, we can't hear you, Marina. Is it hard to unmute it?
Yeah.
Marina. Maybe try rejoin. It might connect you. But just on what Elio was saying there, I think one place we do this really well, and I spotted this today actually when I was just looking at some emails. Anna shared I know everyone else does it, but this is an example. Anna shared a design of the relations tab that she's designing, the wireframes for that, on Discourse, and it instantly got 3 or 4 people commenting, saying this is either beautiful, or I hadn't seen that it's been renamed to integrations, and we get to involve external people, interested people in the project, and share information that we probably wouldn't share otherwise.
Yes, totally. It gets a lot of visibility. Honestly, in the last weeks where I was talking a little bit with Ubuntu desktop folks and Yaru, I was having a little bit of debates, and everything was being published on Ubuntu, and I felt like, oh my God, the paparazzis are here. What is happening? So that is an interesting thing to get used to as well. But something I'm afraid of in this whole thing is design by committee, and I've been doing this for many years, and it's horrible. If you would like to kind of see a story whenever you have the time, I'll send you a link where I did a logo for the Apache Foundation, for a project of the Apache Foundation. Hundreds of people commenting, liking, disliking, hating it. It's not a great I don't think open source can be a good democracy in all kinds of senses. And I don't think people have figured out how to deal with it properly yet.
Do you have patterns for like what you think works better? Like, is there a way that you can share your work without having that super sort of unproductive design by committee? What's the best? What's the sweet spot?
I don't think it's a lot about the governance model of the project, right? If anyone who is a contributor or can comment and vote, if we have a voting session on what's the best logo, whatever, I think this goes down the drain pretty quickly. So there needs to be a consensus model on, because people have their specialties, right? So it cannot be a democracy, really, in that sense. And people have so much opinions about visual design. I feel visual design is kind of a niche thing in open source, where you will get into a lot of fights if you don't do it correctly.
But it feels a little bit like the tension of the logo might be about a genuine sort of misunderstanding of the locus of control. Like, a logo is branding for a company. It's never. It's not a democratic thing. Like, it's not.
It should not be. I think so, because.
But but aren't there other elements of design that should be more so?
Yes. It's like a manifesto, right? A manifesto cannot be created, cannot be crowdsourced. There's a group of people who have a vision and try to put this into a manifesto, and people group up and align with the manifesto, right? And I feel it should be similar to kind of branding, at least on the visual side. But it's not. I don't know. It's a very hard discussion, and yeah, it's kind of complex, but yeah.
Marina, are you back? Oh no. Sorry. If you type, we can maybe respond to it. One thing I had last week off, and I had an evening where I thought I'd be productive in a weird way. So I decided to open up GitHub and scroll around the Explore tab and try and find something that I could contribute to. And I spent an hour looking through issues, even easy ones. Like, some projects do a very good job of labeling their, the difficulty level of an issue, I guess, and how long it would take. One set of projects also say, like, this is a 1 hour project, the task, or this is a 3-day task, or this is a 1 month task. And I ended up not having enough context in all of the cases and not knowing if someone was working on it. And then I thought, well, I'll go and have a look at, which I thought was a well sort of maintained project, vanilla, and it was even worse, coming at it with the mindset of no context. Each issue was either under-described, it wasn't clear if it was decided the solution, and I thought it was an interesting sort of exercise. Like, it only took an hour, and I thought it might be interesting for people to do. Like, if we can all dedicate a bit of time to look at external projects and then circle back to our own stuff and then reflect on whether we thought the external projects were any better than what we've done, or if there's anything we can learn from it, improve internally. Should we describe our issues better and things like that? Anyway, sorry, we'll go on to Marina's then. Robin, did you want to respond?
I'm really curious what. Sorry, to Marina or to you?
To Marina.
Yeah. I'm curious what you've tried with regard to trying to engage with the community about accessibility, because I don't think I'm aware of exactly what we've tried.
I can speak to that a little bit. We, for instance, have there's a discourse post calling for people with disabilities who might want to volunteer some of their time to test our websites.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Probably with some echo. So on top of that, there's the fact that because of all the just the philosophy behind, you know, open source and being like more value driven. I mean, it's been super good to have this presentation, but behind that, doesn't that mean that we should? I feel like Ubuntu should be the most accessible operating system out there. I mean, I would like to. I don't know if it should. I would like to. So I was just wondering how like, is it because of the, you know, demographic group that mostly, you know, it's mostly white guys and you know, Western countries, and I don't know. I'm just wondering. I'm surprised because of the kind of values that are behind open source that there's so little interest, or there's been so little interest in accessibility. Yeah, and how
I
we
think
can.
that's it. Sorry.
No.
Just finish. Sorry.
Yeah. No. That's it.
I think that's the diversity problem and the inclusion problem. Like, I think that open source has always been sort of worryingly exclusive. It's people who have the spare time, who have the privilege to be able to develop stuff and have the confidence to like put their work out there and engage in the conversation, and will be well received when they do it. And that turns out to be quite a demographically narrow set of people. And so I think the challenge is therefore to be truly inclusive in your outreach efforts, which is a really, really hard social problem, you know. But I think you've got to keep trying. But I think that's why, like, all of these open source projects end up not being very accessible, because they're written by developers for developers, because they're the only people who engage in the conversation, which is a real shame.
Why do you think the fundamental web is so accessible? I mean, I normally use that as the sort of the pinnacle of, like, they put a lot of effort into being accessible, and that's open and free. Why would they? Did they have like a foundation that focused purely on accessibility, or is this or is it just because of that they just happen to have they were that way and they had those principles?
Is the question for me?
I guess for the room.
I guess maybe it's because web was primarily very text-based and not heavily reliant on graphics. So naturally, that's just easy to make accessible, right? I mean, assistive technology came later, I think. I don't actually know much about it. I didn't do much research, but I think that's the reason. And with semantic markup, yeah, it's just super easy to make things accessible. But with any user interface, graphical user interface, that's where issues, you know, start to arise.
If I may add to the accessibility, I think it's a very good point Robin raised, and that's more of a kind of harder thing to specify. So I'm going to specify something a little bit more concrete than that. Is that maybe if you know, in the history of Ubuntu in 2017, we switched from Unity to GNOME, right? And Unity was something we have always done in-house, and it was something exclusive. GNOME is a bigger ecosystem, right? And I think the problem, and I'm going to beat this drum quite a lot, I think, is that we don't work with the GNOME community too much. We are doing our own thing. We are doing downstream changes, different from upstream. And there's a lot of, I wouldn't say bad blood, but we don't have a really great relationship with GNOME because of that, because we want to do our own thing. And if we want people from the whole ecosystem to contribute to Ubuntu, we need to have a good working relationship with GNOME so that the whole ecosystem can benefit from accessibility, not only Ubuntu in its own, because that's kind of a selfish thing to do, I would say.
I think that's true. I think you should endeavor to try and upstream things. Things won't be accepted though. That's the reality of it. They have different, I don't know, what do you call it? Different values and different thoughts on how they the directions they want to go in. But as long as you propose it, I think that's you've done what you can, right?
I mean, this is the difficulty with the idea of open source, I suppose, at its very core, is that you are engaging with the whole world, like at least in theory, and that's therefore an endless amount of political views and an endless amount of different perspectives, and all you can try and do is communicate honestly and openly and clearly and inclusively, and keep trying to do that, and keep trying to bring people on board and build bridges and minimize conflicts or resolve conflicts and whatever, and just keep trying. But it's, you know, it's going to be tough, I think. I don't know if that's a good summary of anything. It doesn't really help. I think Elliot is completely right that you know, it'd be much nicer. I think Canonical is seen as somewhat dismissive of the community quite often. There are a bunch of fights where we've, you know, there's been a clear community standard and we've deliberately gone a different way, and then we eventually come back to use the community standard, but by that point no one really trusts us. Yeah, it's a problem.
But would maybe be alleviated by sharing. And that's something we can do, right? We don't, you know, I think.
Yeah, that's why I think the transparency thing is so important, because I think part of why people don't trust Canonical is because they don't know what we're up to, because we're quite closed in our way of working, and the more we were open, the more people would feel they understood what we were about, and we were a bit more trustworthy. Like I've always felt that's a thing that Canonical should be better at, but it's tough.
And on that vein, I believe the plan for the team documentation project, which we're centralizing in the private Canonical discourse at the moment, is to create a public rendered version of all of these. At least the ones that we have audited and made sure there's no credentials connected to. So all of that information will eventually work its way back into the public realm. That's the current thinking anyway.
I think this is a good topic for Frankfurt, for anyone who's going to be there. Doesn't seem like it has an ending.
And if anyone wants to propose any talks, like Frankfurt might be in place. If anyone has any ideas, like that, spend an hour looking around our projects to make sure our issues are, you know, easy accessible. Any issues that we have, like even design issues, right? We could. How many times have we tried to define the our team principles? Why don't we brainstorm some ideas and put them out there as a please contribute, give them access to try and contribute to our values and see what we get. Plenty.
Yeah, I would like to mention that in Frankfurt, there are the lighting talks at the end of every day. Usually there are. I don't know if they are organizing it, but if there are, consider it as a very good opportunity to present anything from, you know, your projects or the way we work or some tips to the broader company. I think it's a very good chance.
Does anyone have any the last 5 minutes what I want to bring up?
I put a note in there that sometimes it's tricky to know what things are open and what things are private. And I think sometimes we make mistakes in overshare, but sometimes we make mistakes in undershare. If you ever have any questions, please, ask your manager, ask other people. We will make mistakes forever, but it would be good to try to get better at, publishing things, even within the company, more than we do. That's it.
Cool.
Marina asked a question about like if I had concrete examples of open source in developing community that I didn't answer. I mean, I don't, but I mean, I'd also be very curious. Like I have actually looked, but there is this there's this like open source Africa group. I mean, there's definitely things out there, but I don't know of any specific things, and I would love to know more about what is out there. If anybody does know, we'll find out.
And also, just before we wrap up, we would love some feedback. So if you could send us any good things, bad things, improvements, anything that we could do better in next presentations, please let me and Robin know. Be honest, don't hold anything back. We won't take it personal. Cheers.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.